There you go. The topic of the day is monopoly or pure monopoly or perfect monopoly, right? That should ring the bell. Nothing in the world is pure and perfect, just like there's no pure perfect competition. There's really rarely a case that there would be a pure monopoly in the world. But in many, many situations, we do come very close to having a monopoly in a certain market. So we've seen that with the vaccines recently. A first vaccine came out, which was Pfizer, and it was a monopoly in the land of US vaccines. Then the second came out, and it was already more like an oligopoly market, and we will explain that word next time, oligopoly. Right? So when there is one seller in the market, we have a monopoly. And let me just restate the question of the day. Should those evil monopolies be banned out of their existence? Well, let's understand why they're evil and let's figure out whether all of them are evil. So, first things first, what is a monopoly? A market with only one seller that sells a product for which there are no close substitutes. So example would be EpiPen. EpiPen. So for somebody in a shock, like due to allergy, like peanut allergy, you need an EpiPen for severe allergies. So, and there may be only one producer in that market, and therefore it's a monopoly producer. So if you look at the bottom line, which is a market power scale, with competition being on the very, very left-hand side, where no individual seller or buyer has any ability to change the price. We have monopoly on the opposite side of that scale. A monopoly seller has all the ability in the world to control the price and charge a different price. The question becomes, why don't they raise price up to the sky, make it infinite? Well, let's figure that out. Okay. So, what is it that gives monopolies the power to keep potential other competitors from entering the market? So why wouldn't some other company start producing EpiPens? After all, in a perfectly competitive industry, we have seen free entry into the market. Anybody could uh, put their own EpiPen producing shop next door and start making it. Well, these are the main reasons for why potential producers don't enter the market. Here are the reasons. First reason. So these are called barriers to entry for potential competitors. And the first one is ownership of essential resources. So only one company might have access to diamonds. So the old example used to be De Beers. I think that company still controls a large share of diamonds. But again, it's not a perfect monopoly. There are substitutes for uh, De Beers diamonds. There are other diamonds produced not in South Africa, but perhaps in the other part of the world. Caviar, you could say maybe some Russian producers have access to caviar and they're the only ones able to produce it. Yet there are substitutes to caviar itself. Don't like it, honestly. But instead of caviar, you can eat sardines, you can eat some other fancy lobsters and other foods. Oil, fewer substitutes for oil itself, and a large share of oil is controlled by OPEC countries. So countries that made up a cartel of oil producing countries to exert their monopoly power in terms of setting world prices for oil. Number two reason um, or cause uh, for why a potential entrance into a specific market would not be able to compete or would not be even able to start their business. All sorts of government granted permits, patents, licenses, and copyright. So basically, you can say that it's a government created monopoly. So public utilities is a good example of that, such as gas, electric, water, cable, or even your internet provider. Many people have a choice, but there are the people who don't have a choice of who their, let's say, electrical, gas, water, or cable provider is. So Con Edison is an example. But Edison, too, was a guy who had patents. So if someone, a company, or a person uh, creates an invention and invents a new eternal engine, he can apply for a patent and have the right to his invention to be the sole producer of that for a certain period of time. Let's say pharmaceutical companies, when they apply for a patent, say that for their medication, anti-cancer, anti-blood pressure medication, they ask for a patent which protects them for 20 years. So for 20 years, they become the sole producer of the drug. After that, the drug can become generic. So any other company can get the formula and produce it. There are many shady things that pharmaceuticals can do to extend the patents, yet that's the gist of it. So anybody who has a copyright on not necessarily their invention, but perhaps their book. So you can write a book. So you can be a monopolist if you write a book, or if you record a CD. So you're that's yours. You have a copyright for that CD. Nobody else can produce that CD. Um, what else? So Lady Gaga is an example because she would have copyright for her CD. Any writer. Now, another thing. Oh, Disney is another example that has copyrights on its characters. So here we might start thinking in this direction. Like, does it always? It's always the case that whoever has a monopoly power is super successful and gets positive profits. And you would agree that probably not, right? So not all CDs are successful. Not all books are successful. So monopoly can have a loss, not only a profit. So number three barrier to entry is the behavior of an existing monopolist. So the incumbent monopolist might slash prices and use expensive advertising and keep potential entrants out of the market with several other strategies that I will discuss later. So number four reason, very important reason, is that there are economies of scale in certain markets. So for the whole range of potential output, it may be cheaper to produce if you're only one company as opposed to if you're two separate companies. And that might be true for banking. So you don't have to maintain two headquarters of banks. So you can only have one, and it would be cheaper for a bank this way to provide services to their customers. So cell phone companies, you can have only one set of towers instead of two, and that gives you economies of scale. Other manufacturing, public utilities, and companies like aircraft manufacturers like Boeing. So perhaps Boeing could uh, be the only producer of aircrafts in the whole world. Yet, at one point, the European governments decided to subsidize a European producer, Airbus, so that they do not become entirely dependent on a foreign manufacturer. So that was economies of scale. They're important in many industries. Another potential barrier to entry is called network effect. For example, network effect refers to the phenomenon when the value of a product increases with the number of people who use it. So, do we really need 2 Facebooks or 3 Facebooks? Or do we need only one? Well, one is more valuable than 3 or 4 because each one of us doesn't want to have that many sign-ons, right? We all want to be on one social media. Technically, I could. So, and another network effect is in terms of compatibility. So, Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, do we all want different platforms or do we all want to use one? And that's how a company becomes a monopoly, comes up with its own platform, and we want it to be compatible. We want our files to be openable on a different computer, right? So we are using that one system. It applies to internet browsers too. We want everything to be familiar and compatible. So number 6, reason might be your good old location. If you're the only company selling an essential product with no substitutes in a particular location, that gives you monopoly power, or at least a little bit of monopoly power. So we're talking about large monopoly power today, and then when next time we mention monopolistic competition, we'll be talking about the same thing but on a smaller scale. So monopolistic competition is a thing in between when you have a competitive company, but it has a slightly different product. Okay. So this slide illustrates the phenomenon of a natural monopoly. So in an industry in which there are substantial economies of scale, one company produces the product at a cheaper price, a cheaper cost, we should say, because price is something that it passes on to consumers, and it won't necessarily pass on the smaller price to consumers, but at a smaller cost than 2 or 3 independent companies. So the natural monopoly is an appears is a company normally in an industry with large fixed setup costs. So like public utilities is one example. And we said banking and cell phone are probably very likely other examples. For the entire relevant range of output, the cost is decreasing. And maybe for some irrelevant range of output of 500, as in this example, or 1,000, the cost might try to increase again, but we don't really worry about that because our demand at this point is around 200 units, and the price or at the cost of production per unit is cheaper when you produce more. So natural monopoly. So naturally in this market, there is consolidation, there are mergers and acquisitions because it is way cheaper for one company to produce. And so because public utilities are natural monopolies, there's a lot of talk about deregulation. Shouldn't be done, should it not be done? And one argument against deregulation is it is. So if to come to a Con Ed like power utilities service the market, then and each one of them gets 100 customers, but one a large company could service all 200 customers, then 200 customers could be served at a lower price. So there's no way that deregulation would reduce the price for consumers. It'll make it more expensive. So that's the argument in favor of governments granting permits for public utilities to be the only provider of water, gas, oil, what else needs to be provided for households. So now the question becomes, how do monopolies maximize profit? So we've seen it last time that perfectly competitive businesses use the golden rule, marginal revenue, cost marginal cost, and that way they find their quantity. So today we're looking at industries that can also change not only the quantity but also the price. So the difference between a competitive and a monopoly single company is that the competitive company demand curve was flat, horizontal. We saw that last time, flat, horizontal. And the demand for a monopoly is downward sloping. So the more you want to sell, the more you need to decrease the price. So you're not a price taker. You don't have to abide by one set price set in the market, because you are the market. You are the only seller. But it's absolutely the case that the lower price you charge, the more people will buy from you. And that's why the demand curve for the monopoly is downward sloping. So this is again a comparison of what we saw with a perfectly competitive firm, taking price as given and finding the quantity to maximize its profits. Now let's see, for the monopoly, we no longer have to charge the same price as a competitive business, which happens to be at the intersection of supply and demand. We can now charge a higher price and we could produce less. And perhaps that results in a larger profit for that individual producer in the market. Let's see, it may well be. So since it is the only producer in the market, then the demand curve for the entire market is the demand that the monopoly is facing. Okay? And another quirk here is that monopoly has cost of production, so it does have marginal cost, but it's no longer the same as the supply curve in the market, because of what monopoly supplies is actually whatever it wants, whatever maximizes its profits. So if it wants to supply, it actually does not or randomly want to supply a random amount. We're about to discuss how exactly it decides how much to produce and what price to charge. But suppose it wants to produce QM amount and charge a price of 10. So that would be its point on the demand curve and its supply. So its supply can be a dot. Its supply can be a range. So a range mostly along the demand curve. So that's a funny part about monopoly. So no supply curve it abides by. Let's look at an example, and then we'll look at a picture. First example. Suppose once upon a time we have a single producer of, let's say, oh, what are we going to sell? Let's say we sell gasoline and we're the only gas station, because I'm looking at the price that ranges from $1.50 to $5 or $5.50. So that sounds like gallons of gasoline. Oh, that could be milk too, kind of within that same range. And if we want to sell more, we reduce the price. Or when we reduce the price, more people buy. More people buy. That's why. So in the black on this slide are things that we are given in a problem. So these are the production conditions or the market conditions. And everything in blue and green is something we calculate. Okay, so we of course can calculate total revenue price times quantity, and we have it. We can compute marginal revenue using the same old formula. Change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. Change in quantity is always 100, right? So just take the change in total revenue. So 500 divided by 100, we have a 5 here. Then we have a 4 and a 3 if we go through this calculations. Notice that marginal revenue does not equal price like we used to have in the perfectly competitive case, because it's just an extra revenue. I'll show you on the next slide why it doesn't equal price. And knowing total cost, we can compute average total cost by dividing total cost by the price. And we have the average total cost that is shaped like classic U, letter U. They go down per unit cost and then they come up. So on the marginal cost, also shaped like a check mark, goes down a bit and then goes up. And we're looking for the same intersection as before, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, or comes as close as possible to marginal cost. So let's say we're starting from about unit 300. So marginal revenue is 3, marginal cost is 1, so revenue is higher than cost, so we keep producing. Unit 400, marginal revenue is 2, marginal cost is 1.4. We keep producing because it costs us less than we get for that unit. Unit 500, another batch of 100. Do we produce it or not? Revenue is 1, cost is 1.8. So no, we don't want to go there. So we stop at unit 400. So that's how we maximize our profits. And you could look at the profits and you could actually confirm that profits are highest around that level. So use the marginal revenue, marginal cost rule, even when profits are identical in both cases. Still use the rule. That's what rules are for. Okay, so demand curve and marginal revenue curve. Look back at these numbers. Price and quantity give us the demand curve. So at price 5, 100 are consumed or wanted by buyers. At price 2, 700 are wanted by buyers. And we have the marginal revenue curve that is smaller than the price. in general. So we plot that. Okay, and I promised to tell you why or how you can explain to yourself why marginal revenue is less than the demand curve. Every time the demand curve is sloped down, the marginal revenue is going to be under it, because in order to sell more, we reduce the price, right? And as a result, as we reduce the price from 5 to 4.5, we sell 100 units, but we sell 200, but we sell the same 100 units at a lower price than before. So we lose 50 cents on each of those units, and we gain 100 more units, on which we gain the units which we did not have before. So, and we sell each at $4.50, right? So we get a total gain. So revenue increases by 4, and therefore we put that green dot on 4. And we go on like that. We'll look at the next change from $4.50 to $4. So we reduce the price on each of the 200s, so by 50 cents on each of the 100 units we sell as we move from 200 to 300, and then we increase our gain by $400 because we sell more units. As a result, we have 300 total gain. Okay, so, and we place another dot at 3. So good. We established that the position of the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve, here they are. Always classic shape like this. And we have our marginal costs that we mentioned, looks like a check mark. And we look for the intersection, marginal revenue plus marginal cost, of course. Remember, our production comes in batches of 4, and we're not batches of 100, and we're not producing that 5th batch, right? So we stop at 4, and we read the price. So that we read the price not off of marginal revenue line, but off of the demand curve. So we bounce it up and see that the price we should be charging is 3.5 and selling 400 units. So even this remote gas station located in the middle of nowhere with no competitors and no substitutes for its products is not going to charge you $100 per gallon of gas. Charge you $3.50 because that's the number that's maximizing its profit given the demand conditions and given the cost conditions. All right. And then we have our average total cost, and with the help of that, so we can tell how profitable that business is. Look, cost, average total cost of, it's singing, making a noise. All right, so the cost of producing 400 units per unit is, what is it? 3.5 minus 1, so, right? Well, if we were to return to the table, we'll know the exact number, what it costs us. I think it's somewhere 0.7 or maybe close to 1. So that is our per unit profit. And we are selling for 100 units, so now we can compute that rectangle, the area, and that would be our profit. Now, things change even for the monopolies, right? So nothing is stable. Our demand can decrease because people suddenly want less gas. They're switching to electric vehicles, or maybe there's another gas station that opened up 1,500 miles nearby and people think it's very close. So maybe your cost of production increased. So you became less efficient. Your gasoline is now more expensive. So you have to buy it from the supplier at a higher price. So this average total cost is no longer your cost versus the demand. So suppose the cost went up, right? So the cost went up, we see it as an increase, upward increase in the cost. So as you can see, this blue line is now higher. And we could see that our profits have shrunk, have decreased, have become a smaller rectangle. We still have per unit profit, however, and I may be still happy because it's still positive economic profit. Now, what if costs continue to increase? You know what I'm about to say, right? So our profit can disappear as fast as they appear, right? See the costs going up? The costs continue to go up. There will be a time when we are still producing at our marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Nothing changed on that front, but now the price we are charging is exactly equals the cost of production per gallon, $3.5. All right, so we no longer have a profit. Yes, so there could be a zero profit monopoly. Let me remind you, it's not an unhappy case. It's a case when you are breaking even and you're compensating yourself your opportunity cost of production, even as a monopoly producer of CDs, of some kind of music, that can happen. Now, if costs continue to increase, or if demand for your product continues to decrease, so your book becomes, or your CD becomes less and less popular, right? And you've already spent so much time producing it or writing it, then you can end up with a loss, right? See, nothing changed in terms of your optimal marginal revenue equals marginal cost, Q star, quantity, optimal quantity produced, but now you can be producing at a loss. So same idea as with perfect competition, but as long as you can cover your average variable cost, you want to stay in business for short term. In the long run, of course, you don't want it to last. So next time you sign your lease, you want to get out of this business, switch to something else, write another book or another CD. So it's a loss-making monopoly, and whenever you cannot cover average variable cost, then you shut down immediately. Okay, one more example. The same thing that we just said, but for a constant cost industry. So in this example, per unit costs are the same, no matter whether you're producing small amount or large amount. So it's just going to be a straight line. See, a straight line, marginal cost equals average total cost. So basically there's no fixed cost of production in this case. So maybe it could be something like a consulting firm, right? So it costs you the same number of hours to provide services. In this case, it's diamonds. Maybe the fixed costs have already been paid a long time ago, and you don't want to take them into consideration. So you're thinking of your business. Or maybe you're just a reseller of diamonds. So you really don't pay fixed costs. You only borrow the diamonds when you have a buyer or something like that. So some story like that. If you are a competitive business, so meaning you're not one company, but you are split into 1,000 different, or maybe even just 100 of different jewelry stores, then the price you would be charging will be close to the competitive price. So where marginal cost intersects the demand curve. So in this case, it's point C. So a perfectly competitive industry that consists of not one, but 100 of competing companies will be charging very, very close to the cost of production. So to $200 per whatever unit of carat diamonds we're talking about. So per unit. So it will be selling 16 diamonds at a price of 200 each. Yet, if you're a monopoly and you're one company, then your profit maximizing quantity is where marginal revenue intersects with marginal cost, and you'll be charging a higher price. Let's see. You'll be charging $600 per unit. So on your profit is that teal colored rectangle. Nothing different. So you can compute that profit, look at the quantity sold is 8, and per unit profit is 400. So now a question to you. So if you are staring at the screen, maybe you could help me out with this problem. So what are the monopoly profit maximizing price and quantity for this graph-based example? And then how would we compute the profit? I don't want you to compute it. Just tell me how you would compute it and what quantity would this monopolist produce? And you definitely know it's a monopolist because the demand curve is downward sloping and the marginal revenue curve is right under it. At least, it may not be just one monopoly, it may be a company with some substantive monopoly power. Okay, people, give me your thought. 16, Judy, did you say 16.50 or $6 or $3?
$16.
So you said 16.50, and how many units do you produce?
40.
Yeah, so you produce 40 units because that's an intersection of supply and demand. I'm not supply and demand, of marginal cost and marginal revenue, right? Marginal revenue is downward sloping, marginal costs upward sloping, and the rectangle, is that the rectangle or is it a different rectangle that marks profit? How do we find that? Is that correct or not?
It looks like a rectangle.
It looks like because it ends on average cost, right? That's what we're looking for. Average cost, and then on the other side of it is 16.50, which is the market price. Yeah, so this monopoly, whatever it's producing, is making a profit. Clearly. Now, the next point we're going to make is that monopolies are less efficient than perfect competition. So, compared to a perfectly competitive industry, monopoly is not as good in terms of efficiency. Okay, then we're going to talk about how can it get better? Can it? Are there any ways? And then we're going to say maybe it should be banned if it can't. And now we're going to say, oh, maybe it shouldn't. Okay, that's kind of the next quick discussion. So in the perfectly competitive market, let me remind you, we have consumer surplus and producer surplus that's generated based on the fact that the price is at the intersection of supply and demand at the level of PC in this case. So price equals the cost of production. Companies minimize their production costs, and as a result, each individual company gets no economic profit. Now, in case of the monopoly, as in this graph, price that the monopoly charges is higher than the competitive price, and the quantity produced is lower. So there is no rule whereby monopoly cost would be minimized. So we have seen in maybe previous examples, and we can go back to the previous example and look at this, for example. At unit cost 6, the monopoly is nowhere close to minimizing the cost of production. You see that? I hope you do. So we're not at the minimum average cost. So all the monopoly cares about is making as large of a profit as possible. So let's go back here and say, okay, well, monopoly overcharges, it underproduces compared to socially optimal amount, and it results in a deadweight loss. Deadweight loss for society because the consumers are now paying higher price. Producers redistribute some of their consumer surplus towards themselves. And there's this yellow area that is something that used to be producer and consumer surplus, or could have been. It didn't used to be. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that, because the industry did not necessarily used to be competitive and then become monopoly. But this is in the sense that if it wasn't monopoly, if it was more competitive, then we would have been enjoying more consumer and producer surplus, because there will be more people producing and selling and more people buying who are currently not buying at this higher price, then more people would be buying. So that's inefficient from the social standpoint. Okay, so inefficient. And we'll look at this inefficiency again at the graph with constant prices. So with constant prices, where the price is just a straight line and not a marginal cost that goes like a check mark up, we see the same thing. So the consumer surplus in case of perfect competition on the left-hand side is way larger than the consumer surplus, the tiny blue area on top triangle, in case of monopoly, because the prices are higher. Now monopoly's profits are higher and there is a deadweight loss. So what do we do? 3 ways in general exist to deal with the inefficiency of monopolies. And they're not necessarily 3 ways that governments have to deal. Monopolies themselves address it quite well, I might say, and you'll see in a second. So one way is there's regulation that comes from the government, and it's applied most often in case of natural monopolies, but also in case of pharmaceuticals. So, and other monopolized industries too. There's the second way is called price discrimination. I'll tell you in a second, even though it's mostly the readings for it in the next module, but I will kind of go over it too because it's kind of fun. And then there is a way to deal with monopolies with the sledgehammer. So just split them into several competing firms and ask them to compete with each other instead of colluding and setting prices. Okay, so regulating a natural monopoly is an interesting exercise, right? Just think about it. You're a government, you are trying, you know that Con Ed is going to overcharge for electricity. If it's the only provider of electricity in New York City, so you gave them the permit and you told them don't overcharge, and they said, oh yeah, like hell, we're monopolists here, so whatever we want, we're going to charge, or else people will freeze. So that's not a good outcome. It's not good for your voters, right? So for your staying in power. So, and it's just not good for the social good, right? You don't want people to suffer because some company wants to make a profit. So You want to regulate it and help it set a price that is fair for everybody, that may allow the company to stay in business and make a little bit of operating profit, right? Just economic profit, or maybe zero economic profit, which means they are making ends meet quite well. So if you live in a communist country like Venezuela, you might also consider another option, just straight nationalizing the public utilities and have the government produce power. You might end up with really good prices in that case, right? With a lot of inefficiencies oftentimes. They're really poorly run government operated utilities. Okay, in this example, there are three possible prices that kind of price points that need to be highlighted on the demand curve of a natural monopoly. And now, who can remind me? I'm looking at this graph. So yes, put your eyes onto that graph and tell me, how do we know that we're dealing with a natural monopoly from this graph? How can we tell?
From the marginal revenue curve is always declining.
Oh, that tells us that we're dealing with a firm with some monopoly power. Nope, try again. Anybody? Anybody?
It's under the demand curve.
Did you say demand? Did you say demand curve?
Because the marginal revenue is below or underneath the demand curve.
Well, that only tells you that you're dealing with a monopoly or a firm with monopoly power. It doesn't tell you that you're dealing with a natural monopoly. Natural monopoly is something different, something special. Okay, what makes a natural monopoly natural monopoly? Think about it.
The average total cost.
Yes, yes, that's perfect. So it has something to do with the average total cost. Okay, well, tell us more a little bit. What's happening to it?
In this case, it's decreasing.
At some point, when the intersection with the demand uh, line, that's actually the lowest point of the average total cost.
Yeah, it's high when the quantity is low, but then if we increase the quantity to produce more and more and more, the average total cost keep it decreasing. Yes, it intersects with the demand curve. The demand curve shows us how much people are willing to buy, or people need, or willing and able to buy, technically, right? And the costs are still decreasing. They may be increasing later. We don't care because it's not in demand that huge amount. But yes, if we see declining average total cost, and that means it's a natural monopoly. Only one company should produce it. So it needs to be regulated. It needs to be allowed. So for best results, we don't want to allow two companies to provide these electrical power. We want one, but we want to regulate it. So they can set their price at monopoly price, which would be PM, monopoly price, and that would be too high. We know that, right? That fewer people will have electricity in their homes. Only the rich people who can pay. We don't want that outcome. Then we could set the price at um, anywhere in between. Of course, we could also set the price. It just won't be um, super smart to do. Let's look at the extremes and then decide whether we want to go slightly up or down. So fair return price, when the price equals the cost of production. So that's P sub R, price R, regulation, regulated. It is allowing companies to make ends meet, to provide the service, still make economic profits, and charge the customers just the cost of production. Sounds like a really good, fair return price, a fair price. And you could also charge a marginal cost of production, which won't allow the companies to compensate for their fixed cost. So that would ruin the business, public utilities business. So you don't want to do that. So ideally, you're looking for that really nice fair price that equals to the cost of production. So you need some information from public utilities. So what does it cost you to supply a unit of BTU or whatever it is, kilowatt, right? So of electricity to a customer, and set the price accordingly, regulate it accordingly by telling them you can't charge above like that and that amount. Okay, so that's what regulation is about. In this graph, we are looking at on the same picture, same graph as we saw in the previous picture with constant cost. So marginal cost is a straight line. You see the average cost decreasing through the entire range of output, and the demand curve is intersecting somewhere with a marginal cost, which that would be perfectly competitive output, but we're not looking at it. So it's on this other graph, on the second graph, where marginal cost, actually the total, we're not even looking at that. Marginal cost is really low in here, but average cost is higher because national monopolies typically have substantial fixed cost of production. Fixed cost of production are really high, so that's why we have average total cost pretty much higher. So we are looking for a point where okay, so this graph actually compares what would happen if we have unregulated national monopoly. Well, then the company behaves like a regular monopolist and they set their price where optimal monopoly profit maximizing price would be. So they look for marginal revenue, intersections marginal cost, and then they bounce off the find the quantity and bounce that off the demand curve to find the price, and then they get their profits. And with a regulated natural monopoly, we set the price lower. Therefore, in this case, profits are eliminated for the monopolist to zero, and then consumer surplus is higher. So same story with a different graph. Now, price discrimination is something that monopolies already doing to make themselves more efficient. As interesting as that sounds, that practicing price discrimination makes companies with monopoly power more efficient. How? Okay. Looking at this graph, this monopolist charges only one price. This monopolist does not discriminate based on any characteristics of the customers. So there's only one profit maximizing price. So it's called one price monopoly. And we do see them in the real world. Sometimes there's only one price for something. desirable product. But more often not, we see many prices for the same product. So ideally, in order to sell, like this case, when you have only one price, you're potentially losing profits. Well, I can't see your question yet, but I'll read them in a minute. Some buyers who are rich, perhaps, or just desperately in need of something, are willing to pay more for the same product. So we're not selling to them. So we're not capturing that profit. The rectangle on the top. And then there's some buyers for whom the price is too high. And we're not selling to them. Do you want to be selling to them? Hell yeah, because our cost of production, if we're selling beyond this Q1 or Q star, we could still, our cost of production is pretty low. So as long as we can cover our cost of production, we want to sell. So we are losing the potential profit. So we somehow need to figure out how to charge somebody who's rich a higher price and somebody who's poor or with lower willingness to pay a lower price. So ideally, if we can figure out a way to charge each and every customer their willingness to pay, we could capture this entire yellow area. There used to be consumer surplus. Most of it, they're not used to be. I shouldn't say used to be. That could have been consumer surplus and a little bit even producer surplus in a perfectly competitive world, right? So-called this upper triangle would have been consumer surplus mostly, with a little bit of producer surplus. But now that would be monopolist profits. So that would be entirely producer surplus for the monopoly. If we only can figure out how to make everybody confess what they are willing to pay for this wonderful and unique product that we are selling. And if we do so, then instead of selling QM, quantity monopoly, we will be selling the exact same quantity as a competitive industry would be selling. So don't you find that paradoxical that 100 competitive firms would have come up with the same output as perhaps one evil monopolist if the monopolist can only figure out how to squeeze more money out of you through price discrimination. Well, how exactly price discrimination is practiced in the real world? Okay, well, and we'll answer that question in a second. So if, yes, this price discriminating monopolist will capture the entire producer surplus in the market. Okay, in the real world, so perfect price discrimination was attempted by sites like, okay, it's attempted in many settings, but one good example is priceline.com. So name your own price. So somebody who is willing to pay a higher price, they're presumably going to reveal their willingness to pay so, but I don't know if everybody truthfully reveals their price on websites like that or in any other settings. So there's got to be some tricks involved. Let's think about that. So this graph shows you that charging two different prices is better than charging only one, because you get an extra consumer part of that consumer surplus that you're missing. And charging three prices is better than two. Your profits keep increasing. So as many different prices as you can charge for the same product, it's to your advantage. You will increase your profits. So find a way to charge people who are willing to pay a high price, and those who are not, give them discounts, right? Give them discounts. Okay, these are examples of price discrimination on a daily basis. So on an airplane, typically, there are no two people who pay the same price. Somebody is flying business class. They are paying over $1,200 for the same ticket. Somebody next to them paying $850. So somebody further down the aisle is paying $165 for the same ticket. It is the same service. You may argue that it's not business class, which is economy class, right? So it is pretty much like barring the difference of like extra peanuts that you're gonna get in the business class and slightly a larger seat. It's probably the same service. You're being transported from one part of the country, from New York to California, let's say, and somebody pays $700 because they bought the ticket 8 days in advance versus somebody paid $108 when they bought the ticket 9 days in advance. That's strange, actually. Right? Shouldn't that be more of a system? But their prices change for airlines occasionally, and they do depend on advance purchases, right? So by implementing advanced, also notice that same day purchases, they commanded low price, this kind of purchases. So if I keep thinking that a day in advance somebody bought for 600, is it even possible? And somebody for 100. So I would be that kind of discrepancy. Well, better yet, maybe somebody didn't pay anything because they used their miles, right? So that's possible too. This way, the advanced purchase requirement is often a way for the airlines to figure out who is a business traveler and who is a leisure traveler. Leisure travelers have high elasticity of demand, whereas business travelers are maybe not even price sensitive at all. They're not even paying out of pocket, right? Other ways to have different to have people pay different amount for the same product is lady night, free, or some happy hours. Any kind of happy hours would be the same dinner or the same drink is sold at a different price. Then lady nights free would be the same service, like entrance to a bar is sold at a zero price to ladies and at a positive price to men. On discounts for, for some reason I'm messing up. Okay, so discounts, 55 plus, or student discount, or maybe peak fare, off peak fare would be all examples of selling the same product at a different price, which is price discrimination. The only thing you need to remember is that it needs to be pretty much the same product. The cost of production should be the same. So how do you sell, for example, the same iPhone at a high price and at a low price? Who can tell me? That's your guess. Like, how would you sell the same iPhone to people who want to pay a high price and to people who are students and can't pay a high price, or to children? Your ideas, marketing people, marketing geniuses, tell me.
Can I try?
Yeah, try.
Use the 2 years, no contract, and no no interest rates. That will be one of them.
that would entice what? People who like cheaper or people who like more expensive?
More cheaper.
Okay, so we're gonna entice them with service.
Yeah, they want the products, but they cannot afford to pay the whole like $1,000 price.
Well, okay, if they cannot afford to pay $1,000 price, how do you like suppose it costs you $300 with all the shipping and the services and stuff to produce $300. You can technically sell it for $350. So how can you sell the same iPhone 2 students for $350 and to rich people or non-students for $1,000? Yes, that's your dilemma. Now, who remembers iPhone 5C?
I have that.
So how different is it from iPhone 5?
Not much.
But okay, well, so what's the story?
Yeah, I think they changed the material from Gorilla Glass and a different kind of resolutions. So it's literally the same iPhone, but just
So they took the same iPhone. They replaced the back with something that looks cheaper. I don't know, it may cost more than for them to produce it, but it looks cheaper. And maybe they also maybe they changed nothing really with the resolution, or even went one step further and spent some more time and valuable money to make it less of a resolution. So to reduce the resolution, right? So they actually sent they sold the same iPhone at a different price.
change the color, change the material, make it more
But it's the
affordable.
same iPhone 5.
Yeah.
That was an attempt to price discriminate. Coupons, another example. You see that on a daily basis, or some membership cards too. BJ's, Costco, or some other box stores that allows you to buy something. So somebody is buying ragu sauce at $1.79, and you're buying it at $1.49 according to this coupon. So you're paying a different price, a lesser price, right? So other examples of price discrimination are on this slide. So we have haggling as one of the ways to effect that different price on the flea market. You have your willingness to pay. So maybe that's a way to perfectly discriminate, to actually you'll pay up to that willingness to pay or walk away and not pay, and somebody else will come and pay up to their willingness to pay. My favorite example is up on top with orange juice. So, jugo de naranja, yeah, gringo. Pay orange juice $5, right? So, and in the case of India, to example, what does it say? That citizens of India pay a lower price, so they're being more direct with that. Whereas, let's say, others, foreigners, pay a higher price. So in order to price discriminate, you should somehow prevent resale. So that's important, right? So if the tickets look the same, right, a citizen of India can come up and just buy it for everyone, and then sell it for an extra dollar to non-citizens, right? So don't want that. And with coupons, people who they should not be huge, right? So we give $100 coupons in the local paper, and then you can do business on that, right? Somebody would buy something cheaper and then resell. So you don't see $100 coupons in the papers because resale would be possible at that point. So you need to also the ability to describe to tell apart like the market segment. So who is a student? You need to be able to figure out or prove some kind of proof that you're a student, that you're a senior citizen. So Joshua is suggesting an example. So Amazon Prime has a significant student discount. They got me to buy it since it was cheaper, and that's the same product at a different price. If any student example of a student discount is price discrimination. Movie theater, it used to have. Remember movie theaters? Yeah, back in the days, we used to have movie theaters, kids. So they had student discounts. Yeah, so having some monopoly power is important too for the ability to price discriminate, but you could safely assume that most businesses do have some, a little bit, at least local monopoly power. Even your local barber shop has a little bit of monopoly power. Okay, common techniques. So coupons, advanced purchase restrictions, which would be with resorts, with hotels, or with airlines mostly. Volume discounts, volume discounts. So I guess any kind of discount. Volume, advanced purchase, or some by age, by time of the day with peak and off-peak fares. Two-part tariffs is something we're not going to go into, but just simply Costco example. You pay a little bit of membership at the beginning. And Disney is another example. Let's say you go to Disney World, you pay a little bit per entrance, and then you also pay per rides too. So kind of a two-part price. Okay. This is a quick example how you can make like justification for why you can charge people who have less elastic demand for whatever product or service you're selling. You can charge them a higher price. So on the left-hand side, we have common readers of a book, and on the right-hand side, we have fans who really want the book. So their demand is inelastic. See, the demand curve is almost vertical, and on the left-hand side, it's mostly horizontal, right? So the vertical demand curve. You see the marginal revenue. We're applying the same rule. So we're selling a monopoly book as a product. And so you have what you have the intersection. Marginal cost of producing a book is it's really close to zero. The cost of printing the ink and the paper and what else? Transportation, stocking the book on the shelves. Now we don't have shelves, it's all online, right? But yet you see that fans are willing to pay a higher price, and booksellers take advantage of that. So most often books come out first with hardbacks and are sold at a higher price, and then they come out as paperbacks. There is not much of a difference in terms of the cost of production. So that's just the way to tell you, look, you have a better book, that's why you're paying a higher price. But most of the time, the book is the same, has the same words in them, right? And it's all pure price discrimination. So for people who've never taken microeconomics or principles of economics, I never heard of price discrimination. So next time you see two bottles of shampoo, one that costs $5 and one that costs $1, and they're about the same in size, But the one that costs $5 might have fancier prints on it. It's gonna say fancy schmancy luxury hair shampoo, and the one that is $1 is gonna say basic necessity. So, and if you want to be a kind of a show-off kind of person, and for you that matters, then you might want to take that $5 and pay, suck it up. Yes, but be aware that this is pure price discrimination. Shampoo is pretty much the same inside that bottle, in one bottle and another bottle. It's made of similar chemical formula. So yeah, so often they be more critical when you're looking at the same product and the price is different, product looks the same, and but one is packaged better. It almost has a gift wrapping on it, right? So that may be a sign of price discrimination. So they want to sell you a similar product that you can buy cheaper but at a higher price. But how can they convince you to pay a higher price? They put a better wrapping, they put better fonts or whatever else on it. So not the essence of it. Okay, a couple of questions related to this kind of last concept of price discrimination. So who has more elastic demand for a rental car? So the person who reserves a car online weeks before a trip, or the person who walks up to the counter as he walks up the airplane after a 4-hour flight. So who has less elastic demand, and who should be charged more? Okay, tell me your thoughts. Give me, speak up. Don't be trying to raise hands. I don't see any hands.
Usually you're charged more if you're coming right off of a flight.
They all
You
agree?
deserve it in
Yes, so Monique is saying the same thing. The person B should be charged more. His demand is less elastic. He needs that car. He needs that car right now. Right? And the other one already has a reservation. So wait, so he's, look, somebody who made the reservation in advance had clearly elastic demand for them. They were sensitive to the price. They probably shopped around to find the best price in town. Actually, don't go to Hertz if you want the best price in town. The person A has a more elastic demand and will be charged less. Yes, correct. D would be the answer here. So now tell me, price discrimination or not? When you see something like this. So when women's haircuts are more expensive than men's, is this an example of price discrimination or not? Somebody says, okay, Monique says yes, price discrimination. And who else? I'm going to go to chat on my phone so I could see all of your answers.
I would say not.
Oh, why would you say no? Give me reasons. Reasons are important.
The reason why is because the women's hair is more complicated.
Yeah.
Much more difficult to taking care rather than women.
Yeah.
So there's no price discrimination.
So because women are usually caretakers of children, women charge more there. Are recouping the cost of the child's haircut. That's an interesting logic. I kind of more side with Rudy on this. Is that, look, how long does it take to think about the cost of production right away? That should be your first thought. So how long does it take to cut a typical woman's hair versus a typical man's hair? Just imagine like a balding kind of men's hair. How long does it take to cut? Well, I'm not a hair cutter, but I've done it before for basically I had two sons, right? So I have some experience. You take cutters and they go.
It's the clipper and then
Yeah, the
done.
clippers, right? It can take 10 minutes, right? Can it take 5 minutes? Um, and then typically for female, probably women's hair is more complicated and takes longer, right? Maybe you just need more skills too and more training, right? So it's just in general to provide a haircut for a female, you need the cost of production would be higher. What did Kiana say? It takes the same amount of time at its core. Women's hair takes more time with additional services. Okay, maybe it takes the same amount of time, but it's just hard to imagine. I mean, I can imagine it with my hair. Like one time, it took about 4 minutes for super cuts back when I was in college to cut my hair. They were really good and efficient, right? But I can imagine like somebody with like real hair, like say African American hair, like really good hair, that won't take 4 minutes, right? They'll probably and with braiding and with all other stuff will take a lot longer. So you cannot say that this is a 4 minutes. I swear I took the time. But back then it used to cost $3.99. Right? You weren't alive back then. So women are expected to pay more, and so they are charged. Well, look, Kiana is saying that women are expected to pay more, and therefore they're charged more. But why are you expected to pay more? Maybe because your demand is less elastic. You really need the haircut, or you think you need a haircut, because you will look bad, and maybe you should be more like shopping around and be less like upset about not having your haircut just that day and give yourself extra time. Just behave like a man if you're connecting that behavior to gender. Um, so women keep a beauty bit. Okay, biz and business. Yeah, beauty is true. There are many other female products supposedly that are the same products but are charged higher price. I've heard examples about razors. You have razors in the male aisle and as a female, like pink, not male aisle. There's no such thing, right? Like female package and male package or deodorant, and there might be a different price. So pink tax, yes, that's what it is. I say it as reminding. It's called pink tax. I don't know if you can come up with a proof of that or an example of that would be interesting. Pink taxes. I've seen one weird example of price discrimination when a computer game, somebody was on NPR talking about a computer game character, female and male character accoutrements were sold at different prices in a computer game. So that was interesting because like cost of production is clearly the same. It's zero in both cases. Okay, how about children are eating free, let's say with paying adult, or children are admitted free with a paying adult. Is that price discrimination? So they got children. Let's think about a restaurant where children eat free when adult is with the purchase of an adult meal. So the children get a meal for free. So IHOP, yeah, okay, IHOP does that. It could be, or a hotel. In a hotel, children stay free without paying adult. So here, do you have a thought on that? on that example, well, I can tell you what I think. That is it the same product, basically. Are we talking about? So it is considered price discrimination if the price for the consumer doesn't change. And the question mark from Kiana. It is considered price discrimination when the same identical product is offered at different prices in different circumstances to different people at different time of the day. So in this case, this a meal is offered, the same meal is offered to children for free. If it is truly the same meal, it is price discrimination, I guess, of families with children. They end up paying a lower price, whereas a family without children paying the full price. Yet, oftentimes, like I would not, this question would be too ambiguous because children just don't need that much. So it's not the same cost of production. It's more like comparing a balding man haircut with your haircut, Rudy's haircut. Rudy has a lot of hair, right? So,
I don't think so.
well, you just cut it. You cut it. You have a cute haircut. That's why you don't have a lot of hair. But it's more like the different cost of production. In one case, it's low with a child. It's a smaller meal. They don't let a 18-year-old child eat for free, right? They only eat a 10 let a 10-year-old child. So it's the same price though. So the couple without children don't pay a child's meal, right? Yeah, and the couple with children don't pay child's meal. Yeah, right. It's the same price, I guess. So there's no difference in price. Yeah, I mean, maybe you will notice good examples of price discrimination and share it in the discussion. That would be fun. So now let's get back to that final question. Should monopolies be banned? Are they terrible? They're inefficient. We know they overcharge, they underproduce. Then they're trying to extract all our consumer surplus in pursuit of their profit. So you could say there are some redeeming, because you should probably bring up some redeeming qualities of monopolies as well, such as more research and development. And I will illustrate that point with my last slide. And I'll come back to this on a second when I'll show you an article from this week, New York Times, about drug prices, how drug prices are really high in the USA, higher than in any other countries. But their concern is that if we are to try to regulate prices, so make the drug companies receive less, like charge less to consumers, then that would create a less obvious problem. So drugs we would like to buy in the future might not exist. Okay, so in other words, innovation could be slowed. So companies like Merck, Pfizer, and Moderna are monopolist producers of certain drugs and sometimes vaccines, right? And if they are not allowed to profit from their potential patents, well, maybe they will just quit producing these drugs. So we'll have fewer cures for anything that we should not be sick with anyway.
But if they stop producing, they don't pursue patents because they don't want to pursue the project or the research, doesn't that then create entry for other companies or entrepreneurs or even generic drug makers for them to produce the product anyway?
Yeah, so if you need 15 years of clinical trials to produce a drug for against blood pressure, that you need to recruit 1,000 people, you need to do double-blind studies, you need to publish them, you need to hire scientists to synthesize formulas for these drugs, try different ones. Can you start that kind of business tomorrow?
I'm saying there are already like generic brand companies are already in the game.
Well, somebody invented it in the past, right? Generic companies means they're using generic drugs that are already, their patents expired. So it's been more than 20 years. The patents expired, so they're producing their drugs. But
Oh, so they're like tangential profiting off of somebody else's research and development.
yeah, somebody already profited for 20 years, and they were no longer allowed. So generic companies can start production, but they will not develop new drugs. They're producing old developed drugs. So the concern here is that research and development is stimulated by the profit motivation. For you have to be investing many years, there's a lot of fixed cost of production for each product, and it's all been done out of greed, out of this profit motive. The guides, potential seeker of a patent to undertake the research. Okay, so it's an incentive to set up business, to become an entrepreneur, right? So economies of scale is another thing that's important. That the larger you are, when you have a natural monopoly, you don't want competition in that market, period, because that would make it less efficient. And then finally, you could say in defense of monopolies that, well, monopolies engage in some competitive behavior too. So if you don't want your operating system to be replaced by somebody else, you might as well you offer it for a cheap price to students, right? To potential customers to be included with the computer that you are producing, or like to bundle it with a computer like Windows do, right? So Microsoft was sued for some monopoly violations. They have been also Apple has a monopoly on its operating system too, right? So, well, and then finally we have monopolists charging slightly lower prices, or might be just maybe substantially lower prices than they would have if there weren't potential entrants, right? And we have price discrimination where optimal quantity or even competitive level quantity is produced and sold at different prices to consumers. Okay, so this is our story of monopolies. Okay. Questions? No questions. I'm glad that you find everything clear as day, right? There's one more item we didn't discuss, is that there are legislations that antitrust legislations that are breaking, that they can break down a company that's grown too large. Just read about it a little bit. Just several laws that I mentioned that are landmark laws. That's all.
Microsoft was the subject of an antitrust law in like the late 90s.
Yeah.
Because of like their use of Internet Explorer as a package deal. Something I don't remember because it was so long ago, but I know it was like the United States versus Microsoft, and it had to do with the Internet Explorer and like some stuff with OEMs, and they lost. Microsoft lost that one.
Yeah, so there's certain things that are against the law, certain behaviors such as product bundling, product tying. So when Microsoft was including Explorer with its operating operating system, right? It's like a bundle. It's like two products are sold, two in one, right? So that was their own browser. And they would kind of keep out the other browsers. So they would kind of impose their own browser on the consumers. So that's discouraged product tying and bundling. Other practices like price collusion is also highly discouraged. Or when companies merge, many mergers of large companies have to be approved by the government. So some study has to be done before, let's say, two large banks merge, whether they are going to monopolize the market and therefore charge a higher price to consumers. But as far as I know, every merger so far in banking has been allowed. Airlines merge a lot too. Maybe we'll continue to merge. Who knows? Airlines are in trouble. Okay. Should we say that? Should we call it a day? Should we say that we've mastered monopoly? Yep. Okay, I believe that's a yes. All right. So I'll see you next week. So next week is I think it's the last lecture for the principles course, but not the last lecture for micro. Okay, we'll chat about that. Yeah, nervously. Oh, we should have
Yeah, I'm
more.
also nervous. So I'm not really doing well in the questions on the quiz.